Hey, welcome to episode one of a series of short videos that I'm putting together called Intoxicating Privilege. I'm doing these videos to talk about the different layers of privilege that I experience and a way of doing it through storytelling and some risk taking on my part as somebody who holds a lot of privilege. This first episode is talking about racism and white privilege, and obviously a topic that is so important to be talking about all the time, but has raised to a certain level at this point. So that's why I wanted to start off with that. And I'm going to tell a story about a time I've been racist just recently. So a couple of years ago, I walked into a print and copy shop in Portland, Oregon, where I live. And the woman behind the counter was an African American woman. And my very first thought when I saw her was, this is going to be a really nasty, rude person. They're not going to be helpful. It's just not going to be a good interaction. I had that thought based entirely on the color of her skin. I had never met her before, never knew her before, and that's racism, flat out. That is the kind of racism that people don't talk about very often. White people don't even recognize it, I think, as racism often, because it's an internal dialogue. It's something that's happening in my brain, but yet it is something that has infiltrated my brain through societal messaging. Now, the other aspect of this story is the things that you don't know about me and why I, as somebody going through that moment, was appalled and ashamed and shocked at the way that I was thinking about this woman. Because here's a little bit more about me that makes this more complex. I am a queer transgender person. So I've experienced the marginalization. I've experienced the feeling of oppression, of discrimination, based on how I look. I haven't always looked like this. And my previous presentation to the world before transitioning was one that didn't fit into the gender norms. And so I was bullied and teased and called names and have felt that feeling of shame for myself based on purely how I look. So I have some understanding of that experience. I also run a nonprofit soccer club for low-income immigrant and refugee kids to play competitive soccer. So I'm often the only person who's a white person in a space and constantly surrounded by more people of color than not. I also teach at the School of Social Work at Portland State University and teach and talk about systemic racism, oppression, and understand the issues at a fairly in-depth level. Lastly, I run a consulting business called Quantum Gender that talks about and educates about gender identity in workplaces and sports organizations, and I'm all about inclusion. So all of these aspects of me would lead you to believe that I am somebody who should never be thinking that and should never have anything close to a thought like that about a person of color, and yet I did. And that is the layer of racism that is so important to unpack because it's not overt. I didn't interact with her in a way that led her to know that I had these thoughts. I was friendly and pleasant and interacted with her in an appropriate way because I recognized what was going on for me. But if I hadn't unpacked that, if I hadn't deconstructed in my mind what was going on and just went about my interaction with her, I could have been an asshole to her. I could have let those internal thoughts come out in a way that led her to feel like, great, just another white guy just being a dick to me. So what's important in this story is that I have personal experiences that have allowed me to deconstruct some privilege, and yet I still had these racist thoughts. And that aspect is the most important and yet most complicated part of racism. And it is the part that so many white people are unwilling to go to. They're unwilling to recognize that they do judge people, that they are racist, and they're unwilling to say, I am racist. That doesn't mean necessarily that you are a terrible, awful human being. But if you cannot get to the point of recognizing and admitting that you have racist thoughts and or say racist things, it's never going to change. And so by me putting this out on the internet, putting my voice out there, risking somewhat by being out and open about this thought that I had, it's moving in the right direction. And I did openly talk about this situation with my students at the School of Social Work right after it happened. And that was a risk that I took because as a professor at an academic institution, we're not supposed to admit those things. We're supposed to be the experts and know the most and never, admit that we are racist. So I took that risk then, and that's the only risk that I took at that moment. But now I want to be more public about it, and not in a way to get compliments and not in a way to be told, oh, you're so brave. This isn't about bravery. This is about me recognizing that I have an incredible amount of privilege that is unearned from my white skin, and I can take this risk and put myself out there in the hopes that it spurs some thought and emotion and energy from other white folks, especially white folks that experience a tremendous amount of privilege, to think about when you've done something similar, you've had a similar thought, you've maybe said something, and you didn't do anything about it. You didn't stop to think about it, and you didn't tell anybody. Now, I'm not saying go out and tell everybody and all the people of color that you know about how you're a racist and then expect to get a pat on the back and be upheld. But you can go and tell another white person that you know about these thoughts and be vulnerable and be open, and hopefully that'll get them to do the same thing. Because we can go and march, we can go and protest, and we should, and I have, but that only goes so far. If you have the platform and you have the voice to say something more, do it. Say it. Don't be afraid of being labeled a racist, because you already are, so you might as well talk about it. And the more we can dissolve this and deconstruct it and talk openly about it, especially as white people, the less intoxicating our privilege will be and the less we will be dependent on it.